Could you make a Fallout pros and cons about the Mr. Handy bot, please? Mr. Handy, you forgot the Mr. Handy. Mr. Handy or RoboBrain, please. Do we get to look forward to a Mr. Handy review? When is the Mr. Handy video coming out? I know you're making a Mr. Handy video. Are you able to say when it might be out? Can you do a video about the pros and cons of the RoboBrain and the Mr. Handy Automatrons? Are you going to do the Mr. Handy and RoboBrain next?
Please make a Mr. Handy guide!
How's the Mr. Handy companion pros and cons coming along? Will you do Mr. Handy?
Mr. Handy!
Mr. Handy next, please. So apparently, quite a few of you wanted to see the pros and cons video on the Mr. Handy. No worries! It's right here. Thanks for all the love and support for the robot reviews, guys. Enjoy. The Mr. Handy. For many of us, the Mr. Handy was the framework for one of the most beloved companions in the game, way before the Automatron DLC was even released. I am of course talking about our good friend, Codsworth. In the earlier levels, when you're fresh out of the vault, this big-eyed British badass can really take the edge off of your first weeks in the Commonwealth. When he isn't helping fuel your newly found addiction to hoarding junk, he's usually telling you how much of a lovely person you are.
You have remained the very model of what humanity should aspire to be.
But 9 times out of 10, you'll find him indulging in his favourite pastime: culinary excellency. Preemptively flame grilling his enemies and then surgically sawing them into tiny little pieces ready for serving. Nice work, buddy.
Thank you, sir.
Everyone knows that Codsworth is a beast of a companion. You don't need this review to tell you that. However, thanks to a gentleman in the comments on a previous Automatron review, I now know that Codsworth is actually significantly buffed in comparison to the standard Automatrons you can build from scratch. Now, I don't know whether this is because he was an available companion prior to the Automatron DLC and has thus kept any bonus damage Bethesda may have given him, but what I do know is that using him would pose an unfair advantage in his favour. So to remain fair to the rest of the robotic companions, I will be using a freshly built Mr. Handy for this review. And so, is Codsworth a badass companion because he's Codsworth, or because he's a Mr. Handy? Well, let's find out. The first thing I noticed when building this Mr. Handy was that the Mr. Handy eye has an engagement distance and accuracy on par with the RoboBrain head, which I thought was quite odd, considering how effectively Codsworth wielded his short-range flamethrower and close-range buzzsaw. But in any case, I decided to capitalise on his bonus range capabilities and kit him out with the best long-range weapons available to him: the chain lightning gun. 2 of them, in fact. I probably would have gone for 3, but for some reason the right hand thruster arm only has melee mods available to it, so I just went with the buzzsaw. You'd think that this would outperform our beloved British badass straight away, wouldn't you? But the truth is, this Mr. Handy has no fucking idea what he's doing. It's like giving a 4-year-old a rifle, shoving it onto the front lines and going, "There you go, now kill some terrorists, you little cunt." Its idea of long range is flying straight into the face of the enemy, waiting until the enemy gives it a good smack, and only then giving it a 2-second dose of electricity before inevitably being spun round, flailing its arms around everywhere like it's having some kind of mental breakdown. It really didn't take me very long to discover that this Mr. Handy just wasn't the one, but I didn't want to give up. I believe that there is a stroke of genius in this robot somewhere, we just have to find it. So I went back to the drawing board and decided to introduce a few modifications into the mix, while still remaining loyal to the overall look of the Mr. Handy, of course. Firstly, we're going to take advantage of the Mr. Handy's experience in hand-to-hand combat, or to be more precise, buzzsaw to face combat. I have fond memories of Codsworth dismembering many raiders with this tool, so I let my imagination run wild for a few minutes and came to the conclusion that 5 is definitely better than 1. And with that logic in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Spinner, equipped with 5 buzzsaw blades for
maximum dismemberment.
Or so I thought. As it turns out, the Mr. Handy will only ever use one of these saws at a time, and even worse, 9 times out of 10 he will only use the ones on his thruster arms, negating any possible bonus melee damage we would have got from the attached sentry arms, not to mention the fucking great blades we bolted onto them. And so, I cried for a little bit, as I witnessed the sad demise of Mr. Spinner. And then I went back to the drawing board. This time I thought I'd try and apply this more is more logic to another one of Codsworth's exceptional skills:
burning people.
And thus, Mr. Fire was born. Let's see how he does, shall we? I will admit, I had my doubts about this one, given the track record of the previous Mr. Handys. But fuck me, this guy will burn your house down if that's what it takes to kill you. It's like he has an addiction to the smell of char-grilled super mutant.
Freshly char-grilled super mutant. Only at M&S.
But seriously, he will even defy the laws of physics in order to set people on fire. Before long, you will look upon your battlefield and everything will be on fire and everyone will be screaming and dying in agony and "Oh no, really, it's all fine, everything is under control." Okay, moving on. I thought for the next one we would try something very similar, but just on the other end of the elemental spectrum. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Ice Ice Baby. My thoughts behind this one was simply that the delivery of the Cryojet's attack is almost identical to the flamethrowers, except it has higher energy damage, which I thought would reap the same results, but this time a little bit more efficiently. But for some reason, it didn't quite work out that way. Now, I don't know whether the game takes into account the individual effects of both fire and ice types of energy damage, but it certainly seems that Mr. Fire does in fact outperform Mr. Ice Ice Baby ever so slightly, despite Mr. Ice Ice Baby's higher attack damage. But while we're on the subject of energy damage, I thought for the next one I'd try and find a compromise between the highest available damage output and what the AI of the Mr. Handy is actually capable of using. I did ponder just shoving a Gatling laser onto every single appendage I could find, but I thought that's not really appropriate for the style of the Mr. Handy. So bearing that in mind, I created this abomination, Mr. Fused Boxenstein. And yes, he did indeed yield some shocking results. What surprised me most about Fused Boxenstein was his ranged capabilities. As last time we tried to give a ranged weapon to a Mr. Handy, we were greeted with,
Bloody hell, sir, what is this thing here you're giving me? Excuse me, sir, but I regret to inform you that I appear to be being repeatedly hit in the face. Could we go now? I do need the toilet.
but not this guy. Amazingly, Mr. Fused Boxenstein knows how to distance himself from the enemy, enabling him to deal 5 Emperors worth of lightning from a mile away straight into this Yao Guai's big stupid face. However, upon encountering an enemy with a more aggressive style of combat, i.e. one of these with one of these, Mr. Fused Boxenstein simply lacks the reaction time needed to counter your enemy's melee attacks in between staggers. And bloody hell do those flailing arms stagger easily. This gets so bad that left to his own devices he will be beaten into a corner and then beaten until dead. Oh, Jesus. We are 5 Mr. Handys in and the best I can come up with is a fucking glorified cigarette lighter with one eye and a paint job. Right, time for some blue sky thinking. Okay, I think I've got it.
Codsworth?
Something you need, sir?
I need bullets. Many bullets.
Beats doing housework.
Alright, let's do this. Behold everyone, Mr. Two Guns Jackson. Let me know in the comments if you get that reference. Now that's what I'm talking about. Spikes, miniguns, and a badass black paint job. This is the Mr. Handy you have been looking for. Mr. Two Guns Jackson channels all of the Mr. Handy's greatest strengths while simultaneously negating all of its weaknesses. Far away enemies, close-up enemies, super mutants, ghouls. Whoa, hang on. Jackson.
Yes, sir?
Remind me, what is it that we say when we see a ghoul?
Fuck this glue. Oh dear.
Oh, for fuck's sake, Jackson, at least give yourself a chance to deliver the punchline.
Oh dear, bugger off, Harry. I came here to deliver some bullets into some faces, not to be a fucking comedian. My name is Two Guns Jackson, not Two Bloody Jokes Jenny. Just get to the point for fuck's sake, you vindictive little cunt.
As I was saying, if you're looking for a Mr. Handy to effectively fight alongside you in the battlefield, then ballistic weaponry and a 90s hairdo is definitely the way to go. Although be warned, as they can develop a bit of an attitude.
Oh, just get on with it, you
And so, in summary, it really is a not the size of the boat but the motion of the ocean type deal with the Mr. Handy. And while there are many directions you can go with modifying him, each come with their own pros and cons. But if you want the most out of him, then I would definitely recommend using either ballistic weaponry or just straight up flamethrowers, as the Mr. Handy's AI really does seem to know its shit when fighting with these two weapons. Thank you for watching everyone. If you like this video and want to see more of my content, then please don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with my latest videos. And if you're a returning subscriber, then thank you for continuing to support my channel. Anyway, have a sexy afternoon. Until next time.